Welcome to this new episode of the Tokenizer series of the Token Reg Radar interviews. The Token Reg Radar is a global regulatory radar constantly collecting data about regulatory news within the token economy and the space of asset tokenization and security tokens. The Token Reg Radar is a SaaS service for lawyers, issuance companies, exchanges, and companies running STOs around the world. Today, I would like to welcome Naz Sipahi from Leiden in the Netherlands. Naz has been a colleague of mine at the Tokenizer for more than a year and done a fantastic job on the Token Reg Radar. And just recently, she completed her Master of Laws at the Leiden University and wrote a highly interesting thesis about regulatory issues of security tokens in the EU. And the findings of this thesis will be the topic of today's interview. So welcome, Naz, and thank you for taking time out for this interview today. Perhaps we should start by talking about the definitions of probably the two most basic terms in your thesis, securities and security tokens. So my first question to you would be, in the context of the EU regulation, what is actually a security and what is a security token?
Of course. First of all, thank you for providing this opportunity to me, Michael. It's very good to interview you today as well. And if we come to your question, right now, there is no legal definition of security tokens in the EU as well. However, they also have their own criteria to deem what is a security, and if a token is characterized as a security, then it should be subject to traditional securities law. And if we look at the legal definitions in the law text, there are various legal documents which define what a security is under EU legislation. But the main and the most important law text for defining securities, traditional securities, or as it defines them as transferable securities, is MiFID 2. In Article 4 of MiFID 2, there is a definition for transferable securities. These are the traditional securities we use in the EU legislation. And the most important elements from this definition are that a security, a traditional security, shall be first transferable, and then second, it should be negotiable on capital market. And from this definition, we can actually see that securities must be able to sold or assigned to another potential buyer or investor, and also then they need to be traded on a existing capital market. And although there is no explicit definition of security tokens under EU legislation presently, both ESMA and the member state jurisdictions believe that a security token shall be considered as a transferable security and thus subject to EU securities legislation if they fulfill the definition of MiFID 2 Article 4, and also, of course, the other applicable EU securities legislation, but the main definition stands in the one in MiFID 2.
So MiFID 2 or MiFID as
MiFID, yes.
2 as I call it as well, is the main piece of regulation in this area, and the term here is transferable security, right? So is that another definition in the EU of security than, for instance, outside EU? It could be in the US, where they talk about security but not this transferable security. Is it more or less the same, actually?
Under EU legislation, like right now, if we look at MiFID 2, it defines securities as transferable securities. It doesn't call them securities. So they define, the legislation itself calls them transferable securities. So that's why, if you look at from a legal perspective, it should fulfill the transferability criteria no matter what. And if you look at the explanations of legal experts, and also if you look at what academia write about how to deem a security as transferable. They call it as like be technically being able to be transferred to another person, but in order to do that, they should also be negotiable on capital market. So these are the two criteria when we look at what constitutes a transferable security. So you should do it technically. From the technical perspective, you should be able to do that, which means the tokens itself cannot be locked up tokens. So they need to be able to technically transfer it to someone else. And also they need to be negotiable so that you can negotiate on the prerequisites of the deal, like the investment. So two parties have to come up together and they have to negotiate on the conditions so that there is a trade between two parties. So if security tokens can fulfill these both criteria, then they will be also deemed as transferable securities. So like I said, for example, if a security token is a locked-in token, so you cannot transfer it technically, it is not allowed to assign it to someone else, then it will probably fail the definition of MiFID II.
Okay, let's move beyond the MiFID II and talk a bit about some additional pieces of EU legislation that are all relevant for certain aspects of the regulation of security tokens. You mentioned several in your thesis, such as the Prospectus Regulation, the Market Abuse Regulation, the Settlement Finality Directive, and the Fifth Anti-Money Laundering Directive. Could you tell us a bit about how these regulations are relevant to security tokens?
Yes, of course. Like I said, if you're in a security trading cycle, there is no one aspect. There are so many different steps to fulfill. So that's why in each step, every step, there's another regulation or legislation that you can apply to security tokens. And if I have to start with the Prospectus Regulation, like traditional securities, if security tokens are regarded as traditional transferable securities under MiFID II, then you'll have to also come up with a prospectus under some rules according to a prospectus regulation, or even if you're accepted from the prospectus obligation, you have to follow the rules of the prospectus regulation. So no matter what, like if a security token can qualify as a security, then you have to follow the prospectus regulation no matter what, because you're going to offer them to the public. So it's a must to follow its rules as well. In terms of market abuse regulation, it is relevant because some of the actions you're doing while you're offering security tokens to public or trading security tokens between investors, some actions may actually fall under market abuse regulation as well. But this is also a very highly debatable topic because, for example, insider dealing is regarded as a market abuse action in terms of market abuse regulation. And this actually might be useful for security tokens, especially for startups, because most of the companies dealing with STO security tokens are startups, and they need the insider information. They need insider dealing. So that's why in my thesis, I also said that it is not very reasonable to apply the market abuse regulation fully to security tokens as well. So this is a relevant topic of discussion in this matter too. Other than that, settlement.
Please explain why do they need that? Why is it that the startup companies need this extra information?
Because like there is no experience in this area right now. They need to exchange information between themselves so they can build up the market, build up the common knowledge on this topic. Right now it's so new, brand new, so they have to literally do some insider dealing to be able to come up with a whole market, a proper market structure. Like single startup, just a basic company which started to deal with security tokens very newly, cannot come up with everything they need to know. There is no prior experience, no prior knowledge, even no regulation right now. So insider dealing is very much essential for startups at this moment. Like, it can be prohibited after some point, but not right now. If we want to grow this sector, if we want to grow this market, we need to allow more things right now. They can be prohibited afterwards, but right now we have to improve, like enhance and support the growth of this market first. That, of course, this is my opinion, but like this is on my research as well. So yeah, like that's why market abuse regulation is kind of relevant right now for security tokens. And then, of course, the Settlement Finality Directive. This is highly related, directly related to traditional securities and hence security tokens at some point, because the main problem with Settlement Finality Directive is Settlement Finality Directive is actually regulating the transfer of ownership of securities. So how you finalize the transfer of ownership and how you finalize the trade, the investments between two investors. And the problem with the Settlement Finality Directive is that it requires a lot of intermediaries. When we say a security trading, it sounds like a buyer, a potential buyer, and a potential seller, but it's not the case. There are so many different intermediaries which are included in this cycle, and they all have their own specific goal, own specific job in this cycle. But with security tokens, and especially with, like you also said, disintermediation, decentralization, we don't need that many intermediaries anymore. If we try to apply the Settlement Finality Directive completely to the security tokens, this is the most problematic directive we're going to deal with, because it would be very unreasonable to expect from a platform, a security token exchange platform, to deal with all of these intermediaries. Then what's the point? Like, you can, like, it will just harm the main gist behind security tokens very bad, because it's just adding more intermediaries, adding more steps to the cycle, which we really want to get rid of. We need faster transactions, we need less intermediaries. But if you nevertheless require intermediaries, what's the point to digitalize the securities on blockchain? This is like this is actually the contradicting the main idea of blockchain in the beginning. So this is a very problematic directive. And the last one, the Fifth Anti-Money Laundering Directive, it is actually not directly related to security tokens, because the Fifth Anti-Money Laundering Directive only applies to crypto to fiat exchanges. So like, if you're monetizing your cryptos into real life, real world money, then it applies. But if you're exchanging crypto to crypto, like in security tokens, you're buying with crypto, usually cryptocurrencies, a security token, it's a crypto to crypto exchange. So that's why you cannot apply it directly. But if you're doing this transaction with real life money, so if you can monetize your security tokens, and if you're trading your security tokens with real life money, then it will also apply in that case.
That's again very interesting. I want to ask a follow-up question on what you said about the intermediaries. How would you convince the current capital market that taking away all these middlemen is such a good idea? I mean, after all, there's a lot of money in doing what they are already doing today.
I would say getting rid of the intermediaries is not a perfect solution for the market, because these intermediaries have a lot of experience as well. If you put all of their responsibilities into the security token exchanges, because they can basically like technically do that. So if you say that, okay, from now on, since you can do it technically, you're going to be responsible from these actions, blah, 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 as well. This is harmful for the exchanges too, because first of all, it is such a huge responsibility. And like we said, if it's a startup, it won't be likely to, would like to take that much responsibility on its shoulders, because it's just a startup. It's such a big legal responsibility. It will have so many adverse effects on them. So they will be hesitating to get into the sector, do a startup on this matter. So that's a minus. And also, like I said, these intermediaries, the traditional intermediaries we are dealing right now in the security trading cycle, they have a lot of experience. They're doing these actions for many years right now. They are very used to it. They know how to do it. So in my opinion, getting rid of all of the intermediaries is not the perfect solution. Maybe digitalizing them as well. We are living in a technological world. We are living in a digital world right now. Nothing is impossible. You can merge their activities, responsibilities into the technology we are having right now too. You can basically do that with a code, or I don't know, like if we can allow security token exchange platforms like traditional exchanges, we can also see digital intermediaries in the future. That's perfectly doable. And I think it will be the case in the future as well. Getting rid of all of the intermediaries is not the solution, but embedding them into the platforms or having other digital platforms just for them is very much doable.
So, but we are talking about a pretty long process here, right?
That's true. That's true. Like it is easy to say that it is doable, but actually doing them in the real life might not that be easy. But I do believe like I don't think like there is a limit to do that in the near future, because security tokens are the future of securities. So even if it will require 30 years, 40 years, I don't know. And I don't think that would be the case, because everything is easier right now to actualize with technology. So we are developing rapidly in the sector. So let's say even in 10, 15 years, it is likely to happen. There is no limit to do it in the following couple of years. We don't have to do that, but we will eventually do that in the future. That's my opinion.
I completely agree, but I like to think about 10 years instead of 30 or 40 years.
Yes, yes. I think so too. I think that's more understandable. Like 30, 40 years, of course, a little bit exaggerated, but eventually.
But another thing is that taking away intermediaries and middlemen is no doubt going to happen. But is it really possible to avoid introducing new intermediaries as well? Because something is not. I think there's probably a limit to what you can automate, or what you can let a smart contract do, or what you can do without having a new kind of intermediaries to make some checks and controls and so on. What I'm thinking about here is, for instance, what Liechtenstein has done by introducing this new role, and as far as I remember, they call it a physical validator. I guess you know that that term. Could you say a little bit about what this physical validator, if you remember it, do in Liechtenstein, and why it has been necessary to introduce a new kind of middleman to make this work more smoothly?
Exactly. Right now, like we can improve the technology in the future, but right now with the current technology, we nevertheless need these intermediaries. Maybe not the old traditional ones, but like you stated, the physical validator in Liechtenstein, the new ones can be introduced as well. That's not a big deal. I mean, if you think about bigger countries with a bigger volume of trading, that might be a little bit problematic. But nevertheless, a physical validator is the person who validates the real asset behind a security token. So you can say, I created a technical security token on a blockchain. That's just a token. That's a digital representation of a security. That's possible. You can say that, okay, I'm going to invest in that right now. But you don't know if this token actually represents a real life traditional security in existing world. So someone, in terms of investor protection, someone has to go and check whether the security token actually contains that security promised to the investor. So this is what the physical validator does right now. If you want to get rid of the book entries, the registries for securities, for example, you can use that kind of intermediary, a new actor in this area. But again, like we said, there is going to be nevertheless an intermediary. That has to be an intermediary. If there is none, there will be so many legal responsibilities on the platform, which will the platforms would not like to have in the first place. And secondly, the investor protection would be so low. So having intermediaries, at least some intermediaries along the way, is also beneficial for the market and especially for the investors. So that's why Liechtenstein introduced this new actor. And I think it was a very on point decision to include such thing, rather than saying that, okay, yeah, the platforms can do everything by themselves. We can code everything into the platform on blockchain, and therefore we don't need any intermediaries anymore. That's yeah, you can say that. They could have said that, but that would be that would have more adverse effects than positive outcomes, I believe.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. But now, if we take a look, let's say, 5 years into the future, how do you expect the situation of the security token regulation in Europe to be at that time?
In my opinion, within 3 or 5 years, the other jurisdictions, the other member states will follow the steps of the front runners in the sector right now, such as Liechtenstein, Germany, France. Other member states will see the potential in the sector, in this market as well. So they will come up with their own legislations, own regulations for this area. Especially like EU is not the only continent, not the only place or jurisdiction that is trying to regulate this area. We also have so many Asian countries which are very expert in this sector, and also America is trying to come up with a new regulation legislation for crypto assets as well. So everyone, even if it's not going to happen in the 3 or 5 years, every jurisdiction is going to come up with new legislation and regulation for this area, because you cannot stop this development. It is already happening. Everyone started to trade with security tokens already. NFTs are such a trend right now. This is happening. So you have to see that. You have to keep your pace up with the new developments in the sector. Otherwise, your economy will clash. This is a very bad outcome for a country to say that, no, I'm not going to regulate this area and it is going to be prohibited. I really doubt that this will be the case. Even China reversed its decision to ban crypto assets. Even they said, okay, from now on, we are going to regulate crypto assets as well. So eventually, all of the countries in the world, I think, have to come up with a regulation for this area. It will be much faster in some continents, in some countries, but it will happen eventually. And within 3 or 5 years, I think the Asian countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, and some of the European countries, like right now, Germany already has got it. But yeah, I mean, like, I couldn't think of an example right now, but like the other European countries within EU, let's say, and also the continent America will follow the steps of the front runners in this area.
This could turn into a kind of regulatory race,
exactly.
a competition between Europe and Southeast Asia and the US, perhaps.
I think so. I very much agree. So it's going to be a competition, a race to come up with the best fitting regulatory framework for these. And the first country that can manage to do that perfectly will be the main center of attraction for security tokens.
Absolutely. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what will happen in the coming years. Thank you so much, Naz, for participating today. And thank you to the viewers of the Token Reg Radar interview brought to you by the Tokenizer. We will be back soon with yet another episode and with a new exciting legal expert as guest. Meanwhile, please visit the Tokenizer and check out the Token Reg Radar on regradar.thetokenizer.io. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today. And I'm looking forward to the next episodes as well.